who's actually going to get value out of a thermal imaging moisture meter, and who would be better off putting their money toward a simpler pin-type device. If you're a home renovation hobbyist who only ever checks a few spots for water intrusion, this might feel like overkill. If you're a professional contractor, a building science consultant, or a serious DIYer tackling large-scale remodels where hidden moisture can bite you later, the FLIR MR176 could be the tool that saves time and prevents costly rework. And for the everyday buyer wondering whether the price tag is justified, yes or no, that's the question I'm trying to answer today. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I first heard about the MR176, the biggest hesitation was the price point. It's not cheap, and you're not just buying a cheap hygrometer, you're paying for an integrated infrared guided measurement (IGM) system that lets you scan a surface without drilling a single hole. The real test is whether that extra capability translates into measurable benefits on a typical job site. I dug into the product specs, read the few available user comments, and talked to a couple of contractors who have already taken the device into the field. What emerged were a handful of practical scenarios where the MR176 really shines and a few where it feels a little heavy-handed. Let's start with the core advantage, the thermal imaging component. Most moisture meters on the market give you a single-point reading, either pin-based, which requires puncturing the material, or a basic pinless sensor that can be fooled by surface temperature changes. The MR176 pairs a 20 MHz bandwidth thermal sensor with a peak detect function that can capture a 50 nanoseconds glitch. In plain English, that means you can spot a wet spot a few millimeters beneath a wall, even if the surface feels dry to the touch. On a recent bathroom remodel, I used the device to scan the studs behind tile before pulling the old drywall. The thermal overlay highlighted a damp patch behind one stud that the pinless reading missed entirely. By drilling a single small test hole at that exact spot, I confirmed a hidden leak. Without the infrared guidance, I would have either missed the problem or taken dozens of unnecessary holes. That brings us to the 5 automatic measurements the MR176 performs. The unit cycles through a quick pinless scan, a pin-based reading, a combined IGM read, a waveform math analysis, and finally a peak detect capture. For most pros, that sequence is a time saver because you don't have to switch tools or recalibrate between different measurement modes. In a recent attic insulation audit, a contractor reported that the MR176 cut his inspection time in half. He could walk the rafters, get a thermal map, and instantly confirm moisture levels without pulling out a separate pin meter for each suspect spot. Now, where does the MR176 fall short? The first thing that trips up occasional users is the learning curve. The device presents data on a small LCD that can be a bit overwhelming if you're not used to interpreting thermal gradients alongside humidity percentages. The waveform math readout, for instance, is powerful but requires you to understand how the software correlates temperature and moisture signatures. For a homeowner who just wants to know wet or dry, that extra data can feel like noise. Some reviewers have mentioned that the menu navigation feels clunky after a few minutes of use, which is understandable given the amount of functionality packed into a handheld. Another practical weakness is the replaceable hygrometer cartridge. While the ability to swap it out means you can keep the sensor calibrated over the years, the cartridges themselves are not cheap, and you'll need to carry spares if you're on a multi-day job. The 10-year warranty covers the main unit, but it doesn't extend to the consumable hygrometer pieces. If you're buying this for occasional spot checks, you might find yourself paying for replacements more often than you anticipated. Battery life is decent, about 8 hours of continuous scanning on a full charge, but you have to remember to bring a spare if you're working in remote locations without easy access to power. The device also weighs a tad more than a typical Pinless meter, which can be noticeable when you're moving around a tight crawl space. It's not a deal breaker, but it's something to factor in if you're already lugging a toolbox full of other gear. So, who should walk away? If you're a weekend DIYer who only needs to check a few pipes under a sink, the MR176 probably isn't the best investment. A basic pin meter or even a simple pinless handheld will give you enough data for a one-off repair. The added cost of infrared imaging, the need to interpret thermal data, and the extra cartridge expense make it a tool that's more than you need for occasional tasks. On the flip side, if you're a building science professional who needs to produce documentation for code compliance, or a contractor handling large-scale water damage restoration, the MR176's ability to locate hidden moisture quickly can translate directly into saved labor hours and fewer callbacks. The thermal overlay helps.